Alrighty, we are now live on YouTube. Welcome everybody to CloudNative London. I'm Cheryl, I'm the host of today's meetup. We're going to just wait sort of another 5 minutes, give people a chance to join. And in the meantime, say hello to all of our guests and speakers today. So if you want to, please say hi and yeah, just introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, I'll start, I won't be shy. So my name's Stuart Wyatt. I'm joining the session today from Palo Alto Networks, and I'm going to be speaking to you about security and obviously how we modernize traditional security teams.
I'm going to pick on people. All right, Josh.
I am. You go first, Josh.
Okay, Anurag, you go. You volunteered first.
So my name is Anurag. I'm joining from Intel today, and I'll be talking about how to enable cloud native apps in Telco Edge Cloud. So this is a merger of networking and cloud technologies close to the user. So we'll talk about that.
Hasith, you want to say hello?
Yeah, sure. My name is Hasith. I'm joining from Cisco, and we'll be sharing about how we scaled up some of our media services using cloud native tech in the last couple of months. Should be pretty interesting story, hopefully.
I can go next. Hey folks, my name is Mercion. I work with Hasith there, so I'm also from Cisco. So it'll be an interesting talk. It'll be also interesting to see what you guys have to say for the poll as well. But hopefully we can share a bit of our journey with Kubernetes, and it'd be nice to get feedback on what your experiences are with it as well.
Great shirt, by the way.
I like it. It's good shirts, you know. Life's too short for boring shirts.
Cool. Let me start sharing my screen because I'm going to do a little introduction. Okay. I think probably don't need to wait 50 minutes. Let's wait 5 minutes and then we'll kick off for reals. Yeah, this is pretty fun. KubeCon is coming up. Is anybody going to KubeCon?
Yes.
Not decided yet. It depends on what happens, I guess.
It's definitely like a different experience. And I'm going to say this carefully since, you know, I work for CNCF, but yeah, like, I don't know. It's just very hectic. There's a lot of stuff going on right now.
Yeah,
trying to make it good.
Yeah, I was looking forward to getting to my first one in Europe, but obviously current events changed that a little bit.
Oh, right. So Amsterdam would be your first one.
That would be my first one, yeah.
Yeah. I think it would probably be my 8th or something if I'd.
I bet you've seen it grow quite impressively as well, haven't you, over the years?
Oh yeah, I mean, my first one that I went to, I went on a diversity scholarship, so didn't know anybody, didn't really know what Kubernetes was. Yeah, so it's come on pretty fast in the last couple of months, the last couple of years. Danny, did you ever go to KubeCon? I think you're on mute.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I was looking for the unmute button there for a second. All right, okay. Not yet. I do want to go. Kind of working out how at the moment. I do plan to go, put it that way. I'm just not sure when yet.
Yeah. Well, at least I know, Josh, you're involved with SNCC and the vendor sponsor booth side of things, right?
Yep. Yeah, I'm there mostly as an attendee, but I'll be on our vendor booth for a little while, and I'm taking part in there's like some Slack that I'm going to be using to answer queries and talk to potential customers, stuff like that.
I'm excited. I think it's going to be a very interesting experiment. So we'll see who joins, see how long people stay around. Like, I think it's much harder to keep up these virtual meetups or virtual events compared to the face-to-face stuff. In fact, I'd be interested to hear from you. Like, I've kept this meetup as more or less 2 hours, which is pretty much the same as it was when it was live. Like, I know does that feel long to you? I don't know, what are your thoughts?
I think personally, obviously, when you're on a Zoom or session, it's obviously 2 hours is quite a long time because you've not obviously the social elements not quite the same as being physically together. But yeah, I guess ultimately it comes down to the content really. So if obviously the content's right, then people are going to hang around.
Yeah, I mean, I've spent almost the entire day on Zoom, and then it's another 2 hours of Zoom. So it can be a bit exhausting. Plus, being at home, it's a bit difficult. There's distractions.
Especially if your kids, dog, they don't know you have a meeting.
Well, I very much appreciate you all joining. So thank you for giving up your evenings to be here. All right, we're pretty much ready to go now. Got 10 seconds left. So if you're not already, then please join the Slack channel as well, where I post stuff and we hang out and chat. Okay, we're officially ready to go. So once again, welcome everybody to CloudNative London. We are a strong, open, diverse developer community around the CloudNative platform and technologies in London and slightly further afield nowadays, thanks to a certain pandemic. So I'm Cheryl. I'm the VP of Ecosystem at CNCF. You can find me on Twitter at OyCheryl. And I want to ask about you. So if you have a phone or laptop or tablet close by, then please go to this URL, oycheryl.com/p. And I would love to ask a couple of questions about you and how you use Cloud Native. And then I would like all of our speakers today to just chat about the results as they come in and see if it's what you expected or see if it's surprising to you. So go to this URL, oycheryl.com/p. That will redirect you to this website called Poll Everywhere, and you can put in your name and then hit continue. Okay, let us go. So first question, is this your first time attending Cloud Native London? Cool, looks like no's are significantly ahead. Pulling ahead even further. Wow, this is really interesting to me. Usually it's about 50-50, like people who've been to Cloud Native before and first timers. Okay, I'm just going to leave this open for a few seconds longer because there'll be people still figuring out how to sign in. Let's wait until the results settle down a little bit. 70-30. Any last takers?
Do you
Okay,
have the
awesome.
total number also? Do you have total number also? How many?
I can look it up afterwards. I'll share the numbers
Okay.
afterwards. So for now, it's just the percent. But I really want to say welcome, whether this is your first time or whether you've been here before. Cool. I think we are more or less settled now. So 2/3, still a few people coming in. 2/3, no. 1/3 first timers. Okay, we're going to go to the next question. Come on. Here we go. Okay, where are you right now? So you'll see there's three kind of granularities. You can say you're in London, you can say you're somewhere in the UK, or you can say you are somewhere else in the world. Let's see who is the furthest away. Oh, I see in the chat window, someone says, has given me a compliment on my kitchen. So thank you. It's very kind of very kind of you. I'm very proud of this kitchen. It's a real kitchen as well, I promise. It's not a virtual background. Cool.
It always makes me happy to see your Chemex and Brewista in the background there, Cheryl.
I have a secret. I have a confession to make. I never actually use this Chemex. My husband has great taste in coffee and hand grinder, does Chemex, does AeroPress, everything. I drink instant coffee. I'm so sorry.
We can't be friends.
Oh, fine. I'll have to learn to use the Chemex just for you, Josh. Whoa, cool. So we have a couple people in the US, or maybe this is Canada. It's hard to see. Someone in Brazil, someone in India. Do feel free to, if you're on the Zoom, then feel free to unmute and just say hello. Would love to hear how you joined. Okay, maybe people feeling shy. I also love this person who's like in the channel tunnel. Oh no, they fixed it. Okay. Okay, it looks like we have mostly London, but a really good spread of people from everywhere else. So again, awesome to see that. All right, next question. What is your job title? So pick the one that's closest to what you do.
Yeah, so not many people from security at the moment. I may be here by myself today.
Security is a hard one because there's so many job titles around security.
Definitely so, yeah.
I mean, my whole company is security, but I would imagine I'm probably closer to a back-end developer than a security engineer. But we make products that are solely focused on security.
Yeah.
I bet some of these, there's probably security architects in this number as well.
Yeah, and people will have a good feel, obviously security it's not just necessarily a title anymore. It is obviously part of people's day job as well to do security, or hopefully it is. So, but yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Looks like we have pretty clear winners here. So a lot of architects, a lot of SRE, DevOps engineers, and then 30% everything else. But I'm surprised there are no security engineers at all. But hey, Stuart, you can teach the rest of us.
I was going to say I didn't hit the comment. I didn't actually do the poll, but yeah, I've been the only one apart from yourself, Josh.
Cool. Okay, let's move on. So just a quick reminder for today's agenda. So we're going to start off with Anurag, who's going to talk about cloud native apps for inferencing and analytics in Telco Edge Cloud. And then Stuart will take over and talk about helping traditional security teams become cloud native. Then we will have a 15-minute break. And then lastly, we'll have Hasith and Mercion, who's going to talk to us about hyperscaling Webex media on cloud native. And we're going to finish in about 2 hours from now. So next couple of questions are going to be back to what the speakers are asking. So I'd love for Anurag, Stuart, Hasith, Mercion to just chat about these results as they come in. So first question, do you target cloud native application development for any edge locations? So your options here are on-prem edge, 5G network, hybrid cloud, or no plans for edge cloud. Anurag, I think you...
Wow, that's fascinating. That is really fascinating. And I can see it started with 5G, but I can clearly see hybrid cloud is dominant one there. It's fascinating.
I think that's a trend I'm seeing amongst my customers, where obviously everyone made various plans, and they've now realised that actually hybrid's probably the way to go in a lot of these use cases. So that's a trend I'm probably seeing as well.
Yeah. Which is now I'm coming to think of it. I did target edge, so it would have been an interesting. So maybe all others are in no plan for edge cloud. That I can take as a proxy, that those who are purely focused on cloud but not have any edge strategy, they are probably focused there. The rest of them are in hybrid cloud. So that's a fascinating thing, because now that means that the application need to be able to, it has to be deployable across platform, across different locations. So fascinating stuff there.
Cool. And I see a comment in the Zoom chat from Hamad, hybrid is future.
That's a good one. That has a double meaning.
Awesome. All right, 63% hybrid cloud. Yeah, that's pretty high. That's...
Yeah, and I think you'll see the way a lot of the public cloud providers, so Google, etc., are positioning with the likes of Anthos. They're obviously moving with that hybrid approach. So yeah, definitely the way I see things going with my customers.
Yes, and wavelength also. So yeah, when we talk about the evolution, network evolution, we'll talk about what they are doing and how they are trying to come into that space if we get a chance.
Fantastic. All right, let's go to the next question. So, right, do you actively engage with your security teams today? So your options are yes, a lot, yes, somewhat, not really, and not at all.
Yeah, this is going to be, from my perspective, this will be quite interesting because, you know, from what I do day to day when I deal with customers, obviously, you know, I speak to different ranges of customers. So I sometimes speak to traditional security teams where they focus on things like files, etc. But on the other side, I also speak to a lot of the DevOps teams where actually they've said security is not really keeping up with what they're trying to do. So they just engage us directly and they effectively bypass security. So I guess the not reallys or the not alls there may be the guys and the girls that have gone out and done it themselves. But yeah, it's interesting to see. It's quite an even split really for the top three.
I mean, we'd love to see if anybody says not really or not at all.Maybe you can put in the comments, like, do you plan to change that? Or is that what you expect to go
I'll tell you. So I'll tell you. I mentioned not really, but I know that is just a pressure of other things that need to happen for the most viable, product for that to develop. It has to be there. So I know definitely that at platform level, at silicon layer, a lot of activity is happening. But how do we make it? How do we distill it to the edge customers? So that's why. And that's the focus now.
I think personally, it's really great to see that 32% of respondents said yes a lot. Whether or not that's out of choice or pain is a different question altogether.
And the other thing is, you really need to push security processes and practices to change and adopt cloud native techniques and rather than it being a lot of process, right? It doesn't need to be sort of the enemy of how to say convenience and more modern way of doing things, right?
Yeah, definitely so. And we'll talk about some of this during the presentation on how we can hopefully smooth that and also bring them along on the journey, as it were.
Yeah, I think Hammer's point in the comments is pretty good. It's like, it's crucial because otherwise you need to patchwork it in later on, which is definitely more painful the later you leave it.
Yeah, and you know, from my own experience, I've actually seen security teams that have because they've not been involved in the process. I've seen them pretty much shoot down a project, and it's not even about whether it's right or wrong. It's just the fact they weren't involved. You know, that's becoming rarer and rarer, that sort of scenario, but it does occasionally still happen.
So Jar says, I'm building products for others to deploy. So in general, our internal security teams aren't relevant. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, so I guess it depends, because obviously depending on the products you're building, you've still got to look at compliance and things like that, depending on the audience then products are for. And ultimately, you know, some of your customers, I guess, are going to want to sort of understand what measures you've gone to obviously meet best practices. And we find that a lot, you know, from Palo Alto Networks, even though, you know, similar to yourselves, we're obviously got security platforms that we're selling to end users. We still find that we get asked a lot about our own due diligence, our own security practices, because customers want to make sure that actually anything they are deploying from yourselves, you've actually followed best practices, and they don't want to take the risk of their data on a platform that's not secure.
Cool, that makes sense to me. Let's go to our last question. Very pertinent to right now. What is the most important aspect of a virtual meeting to you? So your options are reliability and quality, security and privacy, or aesthetics and experience. And there's no all of the above option.
Definitely all three are important, but I felt like it's better to remove that option.
Yeah, definitely, clearly, reliability and security are way ahead.
It's a tough one, actually, because many people, especially people like, you know, who come from tech background, for them, security privacy is a big concern. So yeah.
Yeah, and you know, on that, around, you know, I deal with a lot of organisations sort of day to day, and obviously we all saw in the press Zoom had some security issues, you know, things like that, and
Exactly.
where they didn't have defaults turned on, which we actually saw quite a few organisations I deal with, some in the financial sector, that said we won't use Zoom, so they effectively outlawed Zoom. And you know, which meant we had to use their client or vice versa because of them issues. So I think security and obviously reliability, they almost go hand in hand.
Yeah, definitely in the order I was expecting, or maybe it's changing. I thought people mostly cared about reliability and quality, and definitely depending on the context of the meeting, security and privacy is a concern. But of course, you know, in the connected days, but yeah. And I'm surprised aesthetics and experience are low relatively, but I was expecting it to come less. But yeah, Mercion, thoughts?
So actually, yeah,
I think that's a
and
funny...
actually there is I can explain that away, because it's a new experience. So people are ready to take a little bit of pain. You know, they're saying that, okay, this is a new thing. I know, you know, this is something that we are doing it for the first time, and give some credit to the guys who have built this thing around, and they may take a little bit of pain.
Anurag, I'd have to disagree with you, because I think that's true for a lot of the tech community, maybe, but I think people just expect it to work as well. Like, you don't care about aesthetics and experience unless it doesn't work, you know, and then it really takes you over. If everything works fine, you kind of say that's just the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe that's a good point. Especially from our perspective, because we work in the cloud BU, like, it's like aesthetics and experience is super important because that's what people complain about. And if we get it right, it's kind of it's almost like security. If you do your job correctly, nobody really cares. If you get something wrong, that's you know, it's you know, people suddenly start you know, becoming very vocal about it. So Yeah, I think this is definitely what we expected. I kind of expected the top two to be swapped around given the audience, but that's quite interesting.
Yeah, I definitely see the comments as well, saying it's contextual. Yeah, Eunice says at some meetings you absolutely need good security, in others reliability will be more important. There's not really any wow factor, which kind of agree. I mean, I think aesthetics and experience are somewhat important in the sense that we are actually on Zoom right now, despite the problems it has with security. Definitely, I remember the first time we had one of these virtual meetups, we got Zoom bombed so badly that it was just a nightmare. So that was definitely a problem. But until that point, you know, it'd been great. Oh yeah, that's a good point from Wal. So for internal meetings, security and privacy are very important. For public meetings, I think that reliability and quality are more important. It's a good insight. All right, thank you so much, everybody, for joining the live polling. Really appreciate you putting all your answers in, and for everybody for the discussion. So we are going to go to some thank yous from sponsors. So Megan, do you want to start us off with a 30-second intro from Technovo?
Sure thing. Hi, everyone. I hope you're all well. I'm Megan, and I'm community advocate at Technovo. Technovo is a challenger digital consultancy providing expert partnership and growth without creating dependencies or disrupting culture. Community is truly at the heart of everything we do, which is why we're proud to sponsor CloudNative London. There are two ways in which you can find out more about us. Either DM me on the CloudNative Slack channel, my handle is my name, or you can follow our LinkedIn page where we post our latest updates, articles, and stuff like that. I also look after one of Technovo's community initiatives, Meetup Mates. Meetup Mates is proudly partnered with CloudNative London. The idea behind the initiative is simple. No one should feel like they can't attend the events they're interested in simply because they have no one to go with. Given the unusual social times we're in now, community is more important than ever. Our Slack channel is where like-minded devs can come together, discover virtual events, and just discuss what they've learned. You can find out more info about us at meetup-mates.com, where you can also sign up. Remember, meetups are better with mates. And back to Cheryl.
Thank you, Megan. Stuart, do you want to introduce Palo Alto Networks?
Yeah, sure. Mine won't be as polished. Hi everyone. So yeah, so Palo Alto Networks, the largest independent security vendor in the world. Most people traditionally know us for the traditional security products, so things like next-gen firewalls, where we've been seen as a leader in that space. But more recently, we've expanded out. So obviously, cloud is a huge part of what Palo Alto Networks does. So over the last few years, we've made a number of acquisitions in the space, from leading container, serverless, IaaS and PaaS security platforms, and also enterprise operations and security tool sets there. So yeah, that's really just a high-level overview there.
Awesome. Thank you, Stuart. Do we have any folks from X Matters here on the line? Okay, I'm going to skip. So Humio. Okay, we're going to move on. And then Intel.
Hi, I'm here from Intel. Intel is a technology company working across silicon, across hardware accelerator, AI, networking, things that have brought cloud to where it is a big part in that Intel has played. And I'm here, I will be talking about Edge, which is a fascinating, exciting area where Intel is investing in enabling developers and bringing them to market, their solutions to the market.
Awesome. Thank you so much to all of our sponsors for tonight. So I wanted to try and experiment with these. The first time that we've done this. Back in the pre-COVID-19 days, I would usually try and take a photo with everybody at the meetup. So I'm going to try and do this over Zoom instead. So I'd like everybody to turn on their camera who's on Zoom. Sorry for the people on YouTube. But I'm going to try and get a photo with everybody. Okay, right. So I'm going to be taking this like selfie style, so looking this way, and then I want you all to wave. So hold on, still few people. I want a full house of Zoom, and this is what it looks like on my screen. So If we can get like 3-4 more people to turn their cameras on, then I can have a nice full screen of videos.
We need more. We need more
Come on,
people.
a few more people.
Have you thought of doing a screen capture?
Come on, people, turn on your camera.
Screen. That may be better than trying to do it with your phone.
You can't be still in pajamas.
I was going to say, have you thought of doing a screen capture? Because that may be more efficient than trying to use your phone.
It's more efficient, but it's way less fun.
Okay.
I want to do this specifically. I want to do this with everybody. So, okay, I think we've got as many people as we're going to get. So, try and come in, try and wave as much as you can. Hold on. Ah. You get to see the back of my house as well, back of my kitchen. All right, wave. Okay, awesome. Thank you. That actually worked. I'm surprised. Okay, I'm going to post that later on. We are pretty much at 15 minutes past. So I'm now going to hand over to Anurag, who is going to do the very first talk. So thank you so much, everybody. Anurag, you want to share your screen, and over to you. Anurag, I think you are on mute.
Let me know when you can see my screen.
Yep, all looks good.
Okay, so as I mentioned, we'll be talking about CloudNative and the edge. Essentially, we'll take, for example, and what we are seeing in most popular applications, inferencing and analytics. Based on the audience interest here, I can see there's a lot of good interest in understanding the technology and the networking. So I'll spend some time on that, and feel free to stop me if I'm going too fast, or if there's something that is of isn't of significant value, then I can skip quickly. Okay. So what we will talk today is about how do we enable. This is an exciting area of technology. It is about cloud-native apps, and it's also about edge, and more interesting into telco edge cloud, which is where we get into networking. Platform architect, and I've been working in wireless base station, edge computing area. This is the context of our problem. Okay, so what we understand, and our business is data business. Everyone, we all here. Our business is data. Business is data, right? And why is edge so important? Because what we see that within 5 years, machines and humans will create 10 times more data than we did this year or every year, and 75% of that data will be generated outside data centers. So in the physical world, factories, hospitals, retail, etc. How do we capture value from that? For that, we need a new distributed computing architecture, and we need to place those compute nodes closer to the data source, right? And we'll see how. So we have already seen how this has been done in cloud, and how does that? What we'll talk about is how that is getting rolled out closer to you. So this shows that as we span the geography from remote data centers to closer to you, what does it take to deploy? What's the stack like? And I'll not go into the details of the stack, but I'll mention 3 things here. Right? There are 3 classes of software applications. One is what we call information technology applications. So what they do is they collect data and they do analytics and they take steps, and there is a human involvement there. It's not real time, or at least not expected to be real time. Then the other extreme is the operation technology. This is about cyber physical systems, so that things must happen in real time. There are sensor data that captures inputs, and then there is another physical system that acts on top. And in between, you have the edge technology that bridges the capability gap. Because in the internet domain, the innovation is fast, and any new technology immediately it can be enabled. Whereas in the remote, in the physical domain, every rollout is a pain. So how do you balance this out? Can you provide a bulk of the bare capability at the device end, and the bulk of the processing capabilities that can be upgraded in the middle at the edge? So different class of applications, you can do that. And there are 3 applications I wanted to talk about. And they have all different reliability, availability, latency, mission critical requirement, etc. And that's why they are serviced from different locations. So you can have, for example, applications running in the cloud data center where latency is not as critical, and on-prem where it is. Okay? And in between, you'll have locations for edge cloud. So from single-digit milliseconds to hundreds of milliseconds on the other end. Increasingly, what we are saying is that AI is taking, we are taking two approaches to artificial intelligence. One in which the intelligence is concentrated in the device, and the second one in which the intelligence is in the infrastructure. So these are the two competing thoughts that are going, and I think the current trend that I'm seeing is that the infrastructure is dominating, and that's why we will see that the need for the algorithm to run in the infrastructure, the latency that becomes critical. For both digital transformation as well as for cyber physical system, it's vision and visual analytics. This is the primary use case. That's what we are seeing. And this is how we have understood the world. This is how we see things, and that's how our algorithms reflect the same thing. So one of the first use cases that we are seeing, or the most dominant use case we are seeing, they are all related to either whether it is security, whether it is quality, whether Industry 4.0, they all have got a good visual inferencing element in it. One thing that I wanted to point out here is that as you move away from the center to the remote end, the data center capability, this is where, let me point you the pointer. So as we move away from the cloud to the remote edge, the capacity, the compute capacity, that becomes more and more reduced. So there's a premium for space. So you have to look at heterogeneous environment where you have different hardware acceleration combined with general purpose capability, and you also think about how to monetize it. Right? So those become even more important now than what they were in the cloud. And it has to move. Sorry, my mouse stopped working. But then what we have realized is that edge is, and there is some complexity involved. And that complexity comes from various factors. One is that the network itself is complex. The other one is because the disaggregated devices, earlier what we were doing in separate purpose-built hardware and software, they are highly fragmented. And it does not, the scalability is a big challenge there. They don't lend themselves to agility. You can't have diverse workloads. So on the same platform, you can't have resource sharing. So densification is a problem. You can't run multiple workloads, etc. And again, innovation in IoT is even more complex because that needs to bring these things together along with the ecosystem. That's where we are seeing that edge is a complex environment in which and because different players are involved, from the cloud to where the development happens, to the network where the deployment happens, to the remote end where the actuation happens. Right? So bringing all of them together is a complex challenge. Okay, so this is the slide that I mentioned. This is the emerging model that I mentioned earlier in our conversation, where we see how different players are coming together. But on the extreme right-hand side, you have the CSP-led model. So in our parlance, when we say CSP is a cloud service provider, in general terms, they are actually the hyperscalers, so the Googles, the Amazons, the Microsoft, etc. So what we are seeing there is that they want to provide and in order to tap into these new use cases, in order to have this reduced latency use cases, they want to bring in their kit closer to. And how does this system work? So if you take, for example, Amazon's wavelength. So what they do is they provide a working setup, a physical machine along with their software installed in it inside operators' premises, the telco operators' premises. And the way it works is that it connects locally to the network infrastructure. When the user equipment, UE is the mobile device or the IoT device, when that comes up, that initially sets up an initial connection to the cloud. From there, it is redirected to the edge. That's when we talk about traffic steering, that will be one of the key features there. Right? So that's how the traffic from a particular device is brought to that particular edge. That is the hyperscaler-led model. Then the other extreme is where the communication service providers, the CSPs, or what in common parlance you could say telcos. So it is telco-led model where they build the infrastructure and they bring the hyperscalers in it, which provide their hyperscalers. They provide their services like Microsoft's Office 360 or Azure or some other services. They host it there. But what in between we see two different models, and you will see an interesting development also in this. So in this model where the hyperscalers and the telcos, they collaborate, and this is one of the options is that they rent out the infrastructure in which, like a cloud native application, you host your network functions, the ones that actually provide the network connectivity on the CSPs. You rent it out from the CSPs or the hyperscalers, and that runs the telcos services. So a recent acquisition, for example, and this that shows that there is movement in this direction. So Microsoft, for example, they acquired network function blocks like formed on the user plane or formed on the control plane and Mellanox on the user plane for those network functions. And that gives them the ability to make this happen. So they can deploy their network functions along with their own cloud modules deep inside telco network. And the fourth one that is also getting a lot of attention and is quite popular because it is more democratic option is that various communication service providers, various telcos, they come up with their resources, what all network infrastructure they have, they divide it into resources. And then they provide those resources to an aggregator who markets it, who sells it, so that you can do service discovery, you can provide interconnectivity, etc. That is provided by the aggregator on top. This is, if there are any questions on this slide, I can spend one more minute on this, or otherwise I'll move ahead. Okay, so I'll quickly go through this. What we are seeing that the evolution of cloud means that what we want is new services. We want to introduce them quickly. We want the agility, and we want to do it efficiently. And then when we talk about efficiently, because there is a cost angle, there is a location as a premium, the space availability is a constraint. So we want that to be efficient. And that brings it multi-tenancy, so security is a big concern there. That becomes in hardware acceleration, that becomes in the ability to run different kinds of workload on the same platform. So what we call workload convergence. So we'll talk about these as we talk and as we go through the slide. More importantly, what is important is, and this is what we have learned from the cloud, movement, is that the user experience is very important. So how easy it is to deploy applications, to upgrade applications, etc. The CI/CD pipeline. I'll quickly skip through these. Now spend some time on this one. What we hear from our customers about the key challenges that they face. The three key challenges that they talk about are the data plan. So how do they get efficient data plan? Someone comes up with an innovative application, but without the data plane, that becomes a challenge, because that's where many other specialist companies, they make their money. That's their business. So we identified data plane as one of the key building blocks for this. The second one is the control function. So how do you do all the control signaling to set up the infrastructure, to set up the data path, etc.? How do you connect to a 5G network? How do you tell that this particular UE needs to be serviced by X location and another UE needs to be serviced from the Y location? So that all the control signaling that needs to happen. That is a key concern. Then the whole idea of dimensioning, scalability, etc., ease of deployment, etc., billing monetization, etc. That's where the virtualization, infrastructure virtualization becomes important. So these are the areas where we see that our customers, they have asked, and the solutions that they are looking for, and I'm hoping that the application developers and the platform developers here, they are also hearing the same things. For example, a machine learning or an AI application developer, and as I mentioned, you shouldn't get bogged down in the data plane optimization or what control signaling should be done to do that traffic steering. So they have got an algorithm, they know where to get the models, they've got a pipeline, and they deploy. All that they do is they pick up the right edge location. By the way, the wavelength from AWS that I mentioned, that's what they plan to do. In their console, they will provide an option to deploy applications on the wavelength zone so that will be closer to the operator. But again, there are other challenges, and those challenges, some of them could be cost related, licensing model related. And that's why there is a big push for the open source community to complement that, to provide those solutions. Okay, so you talked about this. Okay, so now we have talked about the motivation, the context. We talk about now the cloud native edge. Okay, so Intel has been at the forefront of cloud technology and networking, and with its AI offering, whether deep learning, what we call HDDL, high density deep learning, or FPGA or graphics, whether it is silicon, whether it is networking. There's a diverse product portfolio from the silicon side. And then to complement that, how do we enable those silicon capabilities? So then there is a robust developer tools. So OpenVINO is the inferencing capability, the visual inferencing. Open Visual Cloud is the media analytics, the visual analytics. DPDK is the data plane, and openness is the edge services orchestration. So how do you bundle all of these together and launch it on the edge platform? Then to support that, especially for the community, there's a vast support for ecosystem scale out, and that is with the help of platforms which are market ready or RFP ready. So when we say RFP ready, so a specific use case, you test a platform, and then that becomes RFP ready, and then you can respond to any RFPs, etc., using that platform, or various solutions that comes from our network builders community. The services, the openness that I talked about is really an open network edge services software, and what it does is it is a software toolkit which enables, is for high performance edge, and it helps onboard applications and also not just application, but network functions with cloud-like agility and across any type of network. So when we talk about access networks, there could be a 5G network, or there could be a 4G network, there could be a LAN, there could be there could be a fixed network, there could be a Wi-Fi network. So how do you hide all this information from the user? When we talk further down about the microservice available, we'll talk a little bit more about that. So that abstraction is provided by the multi-access CNF. So it consists of, and so it's targeting 5G based architecture, and the functionalities that we provide, we'll talk shortly, is for 5G and for 4G, as well as for Wi-Fi. Then there are accelerators. Then how do we make these accelerators seamlessly available to applications? So whether these accelerators are FPGA accelerators, whether they are deep learning accelerators, VCA card, as we call it, the media analytics accelerators, GPU accelerators, etc. How do we make this available to applications? Then there are other microservices that relate to deploying edge services, whether it is transcoding, whether it is various cloud connectors, etc. For example, the same edge platform could connect to multiple cloud nodes, cloud service providers, to service their IoT devices. Then there are orchestration and SD-WAN aspects that come into play. How do you manage? How do you control that? Those are things that you can, the Open Network Edge Services software that can help you configure. Again, we talked about data plane CNI, so they are very important, especially they take away one of the biggest pains. How do you set up a network, overlay network across clusters, across branch and head office, across different branch locations, etc.? How does that work, and how do you enable multiple network interfaces into your apps? So those are the CNIs that help you do that. Then again, from platform resource management perspective, also when we started, we looked at virtualization infrastructure, Vim, and then we also had VMs in mind. But what we saw, the momentum going in the direction of containers. So we saw, how do you bring those capabilities, whether it is CPU core pinning, isolation, whether it is node feature discovery, etc. How do you bring it to the cloud native? And those are the building blocks that are incorporated here. And again, backed up by telemetry. So you collect all the data and then present it, whether it is in Grafana or, so you could use those capabilities to manage your application. Essentially, it is about democratizing the networking and providing the cloud capability. right? Very quickly, I'll spend a few minutes on the architecture to make you familiar with this, that this is really a Kubernetes-based architecture. This is built on top of Kubernetes. Its key building blocks are like Kubernetes scheduler, API server, controller, etc., and then works with etcd, kubectl. We do some enhancements. So, for example, some enhancements, for example, to enable interfaces, detecting all the interfaces, managing, programming them. So we do the enhancements. Interfaces we talk about very soon. We'll talk about those enhancements. So interfaces like which detect what platform hardware accelerators are already on the platform. So for example, if there is an FPGA, how do you schedule an application on the FPGA? How do you make sure that the right version of software is running on the FPGA? If there is a hardware acceleration for deep learning, how do you program the right stuff on that? So those are the things that we add to that. But then we make them available as a resource to the Kubernetes scheduler, so that when you set the YAML file says that I need these kind of capabilities, then the scheduler has the right labels to schedule it on the right edge node. There could be in a cluster there could be multiple edge nodes. Some will have one kind of hardware acceleration capability, others could have different kind of capabilities. So that awareness is built into this Kubernetes scheduler, so that it can schedule the application on the right platform. On the edge node side, and this is where really the worker node. So there is a data plane, but then there are various plugins to enable that data plane to the applications. So this application talks about the smart city applications. I wouldn't go into detail of the application. I'll just talk about the platform. I talked about the edge interface service. So we have these enhancements. We add system ports, for example, to detect the node capability, what's the hardware capability, and based on that, the Kubernetes scheduler can schedule the right application on the right node. Again, CMK is a CPU manager for Kubernetes for making that those QoS capabilities, CPU core pinning, etc. And then hardware acceleration ports like HDDL service and GPU and VPU and video analytics microservices that enable those kind of capabilities. Now, these microservices are like plug and play. You actually, I wouldn't say plug and play at the moment. It's a microservice like you can select them individually, or you could take them integrated as one block. Right? It allows you to choose those microservices that you are interested in. Okay. Any questions on this, or I can quickly move to the building blocks and what they do, what they allow. Okay, so let's club all of this as multi-access microservices. They provide 5G, they traffic steering to 5G from 4G, setting up the path, etc. This is another interesting one that is coming up. So with Wi-Fi 6, this is a serious challenger for 5G because it has some of the QoS problems, etc. So there's a strong interest that how do you connect a Wi-Fi system over a 5G control plane, and there's a block for that, N3 non-3GPP interworking function to bring in those signaling and to make sure that the data from that is sent to the right edge node. So those are the multi-access microservices. Then for these are the edge services related. These are services related to edge, whether it is connecting to different clouds, whether it is transcoding, analytics, etc. I talked about accelerator earlier. So the accelerators that I mentioned, FPGA accelerator, so it enables programming and configuring the FPGA systems. We've tested on PAC N3000. And we can extend that can be extended to ESIC orchestration also. The HDDL is for deep learning, and then the VCA is for visual analytics. So these accelerators we support. Then you can do control and orchestration. This is one of the other big problem that people have talked about is how do you orchestrate their applications? So we have in the cloud, you use the cloud service provider, the hyperscalers console to orchestrate those applications. But then in an edge, in a in a hybrid cloud, how do you orchestrate your application? So there is a so we'll talk about it if we get a chance later. We talked about confidential computing earlier, when we talk about security. So that was the context we talked about security. So all these security features, and this is our roadmap, they're coming very soon. And this is something that's a good interest in this, that how do you securely store the data? How do you isolate? How do you take care of, how do you leverage into the security capabilities provided from the platform? Again, authentication, PKI, and then security libraries, establishing the chain of trust, etc. How do you do all that? So all of that will be coming together into this. And this is the service mesh will be the way you can link all of them together. So you have different applications and services, and you can use a service mesh to connect them together. So this is these TU-based service mesh is expected sometimes so. And the other helpful functions, whether they are operators, BIOS configurations, and for deploying Helm charts, etc. Another big area that I mentioned earlier, the data plane. So the data plane that is available is the OVN over OVS DPDK. So OVN CNI uses underlying OVS DPDK infrastructure. There's a plan to also do VPP sometime in the near future. Again, for more resource conscious and for more efficient implementation, there is also SRIOV capability. Support depending on which network interface card and whether it's supported. You can also do a lot of other functionalities there. And then the CNIs that actually provide you ability, the different ability, whether it's Flannel, which comes with default, Weave, which provides you some kind of meshing, Calico, which provides you some also additional capability related to security, etc. Multus is the one that provides you multiple interfaces. So you can have one coming from SRIOV, another one coming from one of those Flannel, Weave, or Calico, CNI, etc. Bond actually is the one that actually provides links multiple hardware interfaces into one channel, so that if one interface fails, the other one takes over. This provides, this is one of the key aspects of high availability. And also the user space CNI, they provide you the ability to do the packet processing in the user space. I'm just
going to mention we have about 5 minutes left.
I'll try and summarize here, right? So from resource management point of view, you can do the node feature discovery. It helps you discover what are the capabilities available in the node, and it is linked to Kubernetes so that it can help you schedule those resources appropriately. The topology manager, actually, it can take care of, or it looks into your hardware topology and non-uniform memory access capabilities, etc., to deploy the applications and the hardware that is linked to that processing close to each other. Again, talked about CMK earlier for QoS and various other resource management functions. Let me skip quickly to what this together means. So all these capabilities that you get, you will get it from open source or some other, working with other groups, etc. Then what it does is, what openness does is lines that up and then creates a building block. And then there is an openness experience kit that is available that helps them they create your product. So that streamlines the process of converting them into your product, how you use them in your product. I'll skip the deep dive and what we need to do for FPGA acceleration, for data plane, etc. In the slides, probably you would be able to see what we do for telemetry, for how do we do telemetry aware scheduling, etc. What we do for node feature discovery. This is another picture of showing all the different advances that have happened in recent times. I quickly want to show this slide where we say that the openness leverages a lot of work that is already going on in the CNCF community, whether it is scheduling orchestration, whether it is ease of deployment, telemetry, data plane, cloud networking, ease of deployment again. So all these things we are leveraging, and we are on our journey for being part of this community, and there is a good chance that we'll land this. I'll skip again the application and jump quickly to the wrap up here. So in summary, an edge node extends the cloud closer to the user in a telco network, but it must hide the complexity and follow cloud native best practices for this to be practicable. We also saw, or we touched a little bit about it, that inferencing and analytics, these apps, they gain from heterogeneous platform. So you have hardware acceleration capabilities, you have CPU-based processing, you have different configurations, so they gain from that. And using hardware acceleration where available, and where densification, where that is possible. So densification is you have multiple kinds of applications, multiple tenants, etc., using the same hardware. And that's where security also is another dimension to security. And what service provider, this is what working with service provider, what we have learned is what they want. They want a strong community-driven cloud-native edge ecosystem. Okay? That's why our strong emphasis on making this community-led. We can find out more about openness from these sites. You can find about networking, also about various specifications, architecture, APIs, etc. from these links. And you can also download the experience clip from the GitHub, as well as you can give it a try and try. There are already some sample applications built on it. If you want, you could give that a try. Okay. These are next disclaimers. Thank you very much. Did we want to have any? Do you have any time for any questions?
Awesome. Thank you so much. There was one question in the chat asking for your slides. Can you share those? Yeah.
Sure.
Awesome. Other than that, we're pretty much out of time. So if anybody wants to keep asking questions to Anurag, please put them in the chat. And Anurag, are you okay to stay on and answer
yes.
questions through chat? Awesome, awesome. Thank you so much. And we are now going to hand over to the second speaker. So Stuart, are you ready?
Brilliant. Yes, thank you. So just bear with me while I share my screen. So can someone just confirm that they can see my my screen okay?
Yep, yes. Looks good.
Brilliant. Right.
Over to you.
Excellent. So hi everyone, and thank you obviously for taking time out of your evening to join the session and listen to what we're going to talk about tonight. So you know, just to give you a bit of background, so I've worked in security now for around 20 years. So I've come from, you know, traditionally when you think of these meetups and sessions, is typically people from a DevOps focused background that tend to join these sessions. Now, you know, I've been, you know, working with organizations now over several years around cloud and container security. And really the aim of this session is to share really some of what I'm seeing and more, you know, how we help the traditional security teams to actually become cloud native. Now, the good thing is when we saw that initial survey, so the question we asked at the beginning was about how many people are engaging with the security teams. And yeah, it was fantastic to see that obviously there was a large portion of people that voted they are actively engaging, which is obviously a great thing to hear. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the challenges, and then we're going to talk about how we can hopefully improve that relationship and what we can do to help security become more cloud native. So, you know, if we look at really, you know, where a lot of organizations are, you know, this is no, you know, everyone probably knows this, everyone's on that journey or they've done this journey already. But typically what we're seeing within enterprises across Europe and globally is we're seeing obviously everyone's moving from the old waterfall model and they're moving to more agile type practices. And from then on, they're obviously moving to more DevOps methodologies. Now, what we're also seeing is obviously that move from monolith to microservices. So people have done that lift and shift to the cloud. So they've effectively said, okay, I'm taking my on-prem VM, my on-premise applications, I'm going to move that into the cloud. And then after that, they're now starting to think, okay, now I'm in the cloud, how do I become cloud native? How do I start to make use of them various technologies? So yeah, so what we're seeing is, you know, as we start to make this jump from traditional applications to microservices, this is where we're finding that some of the traditional security teams, they're being left behind that. And then further, when we actually start moving closer towards automation and other platforms such as Kubernetes, serverless, we're even finding even more that obviously security teams are being left out. They're not being engaged because sometimes you know, organizations feel that they're not keeping up with what the organization's doing. So in some cases, we're finding that people are being left out. So what this really leads us to is if we look at the challenges we're facing. So from a security perspective, things haven't really changed from the fundamental problems that exist. So the problems are quite similar, but obviously there's different challenges. So the first thing is, you know, since the beginning of time in security, we've always had problems with insecure configurations. You know, people have meant to patch things, they've actually just deployed from the defaults, but they've not actually done the various, you know, hardening they've got to do with them platforms. Now, you know, as we've talked about, and just to show you an example, you know, as we've moved towards the cloud, automation, using infrastructure as a code. We've actually seen obviously more people moving to the likes of Terraform, CloudFormation, and other examples there. Now, irrespective of that, when we're actually seeing that, we're still finding that people aren't actually securing them configurations. So whereas before you had someone manually building up servers or platforms, what you've now got is an automated template, which is great if you get it right. If you get it wrong, you can end up with potentially hundreds or thousands of insecure deployments out there. The other part of this is, and what we obviously see increasingly, is obviously as people move towards containerization, we're starting to see obviously a lot of insecure containers being deployed. And typical examples are containers being deployed and they run as root. And that's typically a default setting we've seen. We see people that are actually embedding private keys into the containers, which once again is against best practices. And typically what we find, this is either because security haven't been engaged, or maybe they don't necessarily understand the problem they're trying to solve. And then, as we still go on, apologies, if we carry on looking at that, we've got the same old challenges before. So apologies, my slides have just gone crazy. Yeah, so the other thing we see as well is, when we're looking at the cloud, we also see, if you're looking at public cloud, even though the providers themselves actively put controls in place to stop you from exposing things to the internet, so maybe making things like S3 buckets public, we're still seeing that happening because people are overriding that. And then just really another play on that, things like encryption not being, on critical workloads, etc. So this is just some of the problems we've seen. And, for anyone that's obviously aware of security, these are the kind of problems that have actually existed since the start of time. But obviously now with the introductions of new architectures, microservices, there's an additional challenge because the cyber teams don't necessarily understand what they're trying to secure. So I just wanted to quickly flash this slide up here. So, if anyone is interested in looking more into, some of the cloud security challenge, whether it be around containerization, orchestration, our Unit 42 threat research team at Palo Alto Networks, they've got a whole host of blog posts basically that are great to have a read on. So for anyone that's interested, go to unit42.paloaltonetworks.com and you'll find a whole host of information on vulnerabilities and risk related to cloud native workloads. So really, let's then get on to the problem. So we've talked obviously around, organizations have made that shift to cloud native. They're moving towards containerization, they're moving towards serverless and for automation. So really, where does this challenge exist for security? So, as I mentioned at the beginning of the session, what I typically find is, I deal with organizations of all sizes across Europe. And what I've typically found from my own experience is, there tends to be a common theme where a lot of the security teams, especially when we're looking at traditional security teams, they're struggling to get to grips with some of the things that obviously we're doing in cloud native and obviously DevOps, what we're working on there. So really a couple of things or a few points that I picked up along the way is, first of all, a lot of security teams aren't necessarily familiar with DevOps mythologies. So they may understand DevOps, they've heard the term, but they're not necessarily familiar with what it is and the processes and the improvements it can lead to for the whole organization. The other part is, as we've touched on, and, something that I typically do a lot is, when I speak to security teams, I'm sometimes speaking to people that are very good at cloud, they're very good at containerization. Other times I find myself dealing with very traditional security teams. So they're used to dealing with antivirus, they're used to dealing with firewalls and typical on-premise type deployments. And typically what I find is, they're not necessarily unwilling to learn. It's more a case of they just don't have that knowledge. So when you turn up and you start talking around Kubernetes, you start talking about cloud native, they sort of sit there and they're struggling to get to grips with it. And this is really one of the main reasons that the DevOps teams may start to bypass the security teams. So the other thing as well, and I guess we've all probably seen this in our experience. So, as I've said, I've been in security for 20 years. I spent quite a bit of time internally working within organizations. And I guess we've all seen that them versus us mentality. So typically you go to the security guy or girl and you effectively ask them, you ask them to look at something. Typically it's towards the end of the project. and they basically turn it down and they say they can't do that because it's not secure. And, you know, there's that thing where everyone doesn't like dealing with security, and likewise security then say, oh, the developers, they're not doing things securely. So, you know, we've all probably encountered that at some point in our careers. The other part as well is what I see quite regularly is when we deal with some organizations, they say they're a DevOps organization. But typically when you start to deal with them, you start to actually see that actually when you start looking at their process for things like change, their process for automation, it's still stuck in the traditional way of waterfall. So everything's built around a really complex change control. There's no agility, there's no feedback, and everyone's scared to do anything because they don't want to be the person that breaks or thinks outside of the box. Now, the other things as well is just, you know, another book which is fantastic. And for anyone that hasn't read it, I highly recommend it. There's a book called The Phoenix Project. And, you know, it's quite famous in DevOps circles. And, you know, from my own experience, when I actually read this book, I obviously found it massively enlightening. You know, I've been one of these security guys that's been around the block for a long time. But one thing I found really interesting is obviously in the Phoenix Project, there's that security guy. So effectively the guy that goes to every meeting and, you know, he's trying to do his best job, but ultimately he's so rigid, he's so stuck in what he's doing that he can't see that actually the business around him is shifting. And if there isn't actually a change, there's not going to be a business to work for. So we've all probably dealt with that guy. And it's quite interesting to start looking at, you know, how you can actually change from a security perspective. So you can actually be an enabler of the business and not just someone that says no to everything. And really the final part I wanted to make on this particular slide is really, you know, one of the other areas that you may have seen, and, you know, just going back to the question we asked, which was fantastic. You know, most people on the call said that actually they were actively engaged with security. You know, I've seen examples where the security team, you know, they're not being involved. So what happens is an application either goes live, or what happens is the security guys and the team gets asked right at the end of the project, can you make sure this is okay? And when they start to actually query, or they start to say there's issues with the actual application, it's too late. The application's about to launch. So I guess these are all things that everyone's familiar with. I just wanted to quickly pause to see if there's any questions or disagreements with that from anyone from what I've mentioned so far. I see there's some great feedback there from Rahul there, saying that obviously, you know, internal security privacy are very important. No, sorry, that's an earlier one, but I can see there are some questions there, which are great. We'll talk about them as we go through. So, you know, just going on then, how can you help the security teams? So first of all, you know, we all know security, when everyone looks at any of the sort of job sort of ratings or rankings, security always come up as being one of the most in-demand areas in IT. Now, something that is really, really rare, and, you know, I do encounter these people in my day-to-day, are people that have both DevOps and security skills. So they're effectively cloud native security people. So I am seeing, which is great, that these are increasingly becoming more popular. So really, what can we do to drag security along on this journey? So, you know, a lot of this follows best practices around things like DevOps. So, you know, a couple of examples there: invite the security teams to the business review and planning meetings. Also bring them along to your scrums. Ultimately, if they're involved in the process earlier on and they feel they're part of the process, you're more likely to get approval than what you would if you actually waited to the end of the actual project itself. The other thing as well that I often see is actually, you know, run educational workshops, invite the security teams along and actually educate them on things like containers, things like cloud native, talk about orchestration. This is really, you know, from what I've seen, and just to give you a bit of our own experience, you know, within Palo Alto Networks, I spent the last 2-3 years, you know, looking at containerization, looking at orchestration. And what I found is, you know, we've got a lot of very skilled security professionals, you know, in the areas they work in. But what I found is when we was actually speaking about containers, we saw that everyone, you know, there was a real big gap in knowledge there. So effectively what we done within Palo Alto Networks is we basically run a number of workshops. So we put together some workshops for the actual the security teams there. So in my case, it's under security architects. And we was actually surprised that we had around 40 people turn up at these workshops, and every one of them was actively engaged, actively asking questions, and they really wanted to learn around containerization. So what I'd say is, if it's possible, get these educational workshops running, try and make them informal. There's some great things you can do there. So the other thing as well, and obviously, this isn't going to be the same for all organizations, send the security team on courses. I myself, I went off and, when I started my journey around containerization, when I started, I looked at the CNCF website, and, I saw that slide showing all the cloud native platforms. There was thousands of logos, thousands of things on, and I was thinking, where do I start? This is an actual minefield for me. So effectively, when I started my journey, I started revising for the CKE, so the Certified Kubernetes Admin. When I first started it, I was quite daunted by this, but by the end of it, I passed it last December. And actually, it gave me a real confidence when I was speaking to customers that were DevOps teams, when I was speaking to Kubernetes admins, it put me on a level playing field for them. So what we've done as well in Palo Alto, we've actually, we've put a number of our customers onto CKE training. And once again, it was amazing at the amount of take up we had. We had around 30, 40 customers in each of the sessions. And once again, a lot of these were traditional security people, and they actively wanted to learn. The other thing as well is, as we're doing tonight on this meetup here, invite your security guys along to the meetup. So, if you're doing DevOps meetups, if you're doing meetups around general technology, invite them along to it. Likewise, go on the security briefings if they're holding them. It's really useful, and it'll also help to build the team up. The other thing, and I talked about on the previous slide, when I started my journey towards containerization and cloud native, I thought, okay, I can just read about containers, I can read about CI processes, and I thought, that's it, that's great, it'll be another bit of technology, tick the box. But as I actually went on this journey, what I found myself was actually there was a lot more about the morphology, the whole change in how we do things. And actually, as I've mentioned, a couple of books I read, DevOps Handbook and the Phoenix Projects were quite amazing. They really changed my perception of dealing with DevOps teams and generally how I could work in security. So what I'd say is, once again, if there's the option, leave a couple of these books around for your security teams and see if they're actually looking to pick it up. Just a couple of other things here. It's also a cultural shift, as we said. Security by, we look to do things, there's traditional ways we like to work, but, through the ways of automation, infrastructure as a code, there's a lot of ways that we can not only improve what we do for the business applications, but actually for security in the way they work as an organization. So the next part I wanted to talk about is I wanted to talk a bit more about the technology side of things. And thanks for putting in the links to the DevOps handbooks. As I said, as we talked about, they're an invaluable read. And for anyone that hasn't read these books, I really recommend it. So typically when I deal with customers on a day-to-day basis, what we see, as I talked about, everyone's at a different stage of their digital transformation. So we've got some customers that are running containerization, they're highly automated, they've done that journey and they're considered mature. We've got a lot of other well-known enterprise customers where they're just starting out on the journey. So, where do we start? Typically, when you hear a lot around cloud native, you hear a lot of buzzwords. So you talk about shifting left from a security perspective. You hear a lot about infrastructure as a code, and being immutable. There's a lot of buzzwords that are out there. But how do we help security get to grips with that? And how do we help them actually go down that route and come on that journey? So the first thing is, and a few key points here is, we've got to look at protection across the life cycle. So not only do we look at actually like the old days of just protecting what's running and what's deployed in production, we've also got to look at automation. We've got to look at doing infrastructure as code scanning. We've also got to look at the whole development life cycle. So whether it's in the build phase, whether it's in secure code management, whether it's actually on the IDE tools that the developers are using, we've got to look up across the whole phase of security and not just wait until the end of the development life cycle. The other thing we talked about as well is we've actually also got to enable trust between the teams. So, in my day-to-day experience, what I saw in the early days is I saw a lot of DevOps teams coming to us and they would effectively said, okay, the security team aren't sort of keeping up. We need a security tool and we need to basically get this secure so we can launch our application. What we're now seeing more and more is we're actually seeing the DevOps and the security teams come closer together. So we're seeing them actively engage and actively share knowledge. So the good news is it's actually matured quite a lot in the last couple of years. And, the final part and, something that a lot of security teams are now getting to grips with is, it's constant change. So when we're in the world of cloud native and we're looking at DevOps, everything's constantly changes. The workloads are ephemeral. It's very rare that we're going to have the same VM that's up for 6 months, a year. Everything could live for seconds or minutes. And we've also got to look at constantly changing architectures. So whether that be containerization, infrastructure as service, serverless, or some other type of technology that's coming down the road. We've got to basically keep an open mind and we've got to constantly keep learning to keep up with these changes. So what I typically do is, for most customers, I've seen a common theme on the actual journey itself, especially when we're talking security teams. So the first thing I see is, we talked about how the horse is already bolted. So a lot of these cloud native workloads are deployed. Some are secure, but a lot of the times we see that, things are out there because there was a business requirement to obviously be agile and get a new service out. So typically where we tend to start with a lot of organizations is we start to say, okay, let's understand what's out there. So before we start doing the whole shift left security and we start looking at the build phase, let's understand what's out there and the current state of the running environment. So typically what we look to do there is we deploy out various technologies and really they give us a view across the cloud native applications. So the first thing is really we can understand the current state of any containers, serverless workloads or IaaS or PaaS infrastructure that's deployed. The other thing that's really important is what we used to see a lot, which is changing now, is obviously a lot of organizations will maybe start out with the open source sort of security and scanning tools. And they're typically very good when you're looking at maybe scanning 1 or 2 applications, or you're maybe looking at a specific architecture. But what we're finding is as businesses are choosing multiple architecture types, you need to have a platform that's got visibility across all of them different areas. And then the last thing is, as we talked about, as we've mentioned at the beginning, trust is really important between the teams. If we're not engaging security or we're not giving them visibility into what we're doing, they're likely to then basically not allow us to do what we're doing. Whereas the more actual transparency we've got with the security teams, the more they're going to give us room to actually execute what we want to do and become obviously more agile and then automate the process even further. And, I've seen in some cases where organizations have said the security team are developing the security technology for this whole cloud native shift, but they've not actually involved the DevOps teams. So what you end up doing is basically security team mandates a tool set or a bunch of tools. And then the DevOps teams come and say, well, actually, that doesn't fit in with any of our architectures, and they just ignore it. And 2 things, they either go to shadow IT and they do it on their own platforms, or they just bypass security altogether. So really, this is the first phase to actually get that transparency, so you start monitoring what's out there within the environment itself. The next thing is, once we understand what's out there in our cloud native environments, the next part is actually to start looking at actually the state of them environments as well. So really the first part I look at with customers is, and nearly every customer, they come to me and when they're looking around containerization, the first thing a lot of customers say is effectively, I want to understand the vulnerabilities that exist within my environment. So obviously everyone wants to understand the container images, they want to look at their serverless functions, and that's effectively the most important thing to them. They want to know if there's any vulnerable packages or libraries, but actually something that's equally important that I see missed a lot is actually compliance. Now, compliance tends to be the thing that's not maybe as exciting. It doesn't flash up lots of red things on the screen, but compliance is equally as important. So, when we're looking at maybe, frameworks around cloud native, well-known baselines that most people have come across include CIS. They do a number of benchmarks. So whether it be for the cloud providers, whether it be for the likes of Docker, whether it be for Kubernetes, for the orchestration. CIS is a great starting place to baseline your environment. And then on top of that, you've got very specific requirements. So you've got NIST 800-190, which is a great framework for container security. And then on top of that, you've got the regulatory requirements. So things like GDPR, PCI. And, you know, I'm always really key to emphasize this to customers, because even if I don't have any software vulnerabilities in my code, if I actually don't build up or configure the environment correctly, I can just walk straight in the back door and effectively then exploit or do something within the environment. The other thing as well, and this is probably quite well known across on this session here, is obviously when we're looking at cloud workloads and cloud native, the next thing is the workload should be immutable. So effectively what we mean by that is we shouldn't be trying to patch running containers. We shouldn't be trying to patch serverless functions. We should actually be fixing the problem at the source. So feeding back to our DevOps teams, and when where we're at that level of automation and maturity, we then also start to automate into that whole build process. And then really finally, you know, a point on this slide here is one of the most important things I see is, you know, when you're starting to look at security from an enterprise perspective, you know, it's great to run scripts against my environments to do testing. You know, you may have various things you use, but actually equally important is actually the fact that I can integrate in with enterprise orchestration and workflows. And what I mean by that is obviously the DevOps teams, you know, you've got the tools you like to use. So you've obviously got the likes of Jira, you've got Slack, you've got Jenkins, there's a whole host of tools, you know, IDE tools like VS Code, etc. Then on the security side and the operations side, they've also got the tool sets they like to use and the workflows there. So obviously things like SIM tools, security orchestration and response tools, and then any other native tool sets. So if we're really going to be successful, we need to actually start to leverage everyone's workflows to make it as easy as we can for them teams. Now, I just wanted to put this slide in. I'm just obviously mindful of time. This is just a slide that I like to put up, and it's really showing that, you know, obviously containers are fantastic. You know, everyone loves containers and they do great things, but actually we're not securing the underlying platforms. It can obviously lead to quite a lot of problems. And, you know, just as I talked about on that last slide, we have a lot of issues where we see obviously defaults, people leaving defaults. They're not turning on, you know, some of the security features that are available within the likes of Kubernetes for the orchestration. So things like pod security policies, network policies, etc. And then also we've still got the same old problems. You know, containers are cool, everyone likes containers, but what about the underlying host and nodes? They're actually hosting that orchestration, they're hosting the runtime. If we don't actually protect and make sure they're secure, we can end up with a situation similar to that picture on the right. And just for anyone that isn't aware, last year there was quite a large CV released specifically around container runtimes. And effectively, by default, you know, Docker will run containers as root unless you specify otherwise in your image. And what this particular vulnerability, potentially, if it was vulnerable, your container image, it effectively allowed it to escape the underlying container image, and then you could effectively start executing code on the actual underlying host or node. So obviously, if you imagine you've got 100 containers that are sitting on a node, this could be catastrophic to a business. So really just an example there. I'm just aware of obviously time, we're running short on time. So really a few points I just wanted to raise. So, you know, once we've got the basics right, so once we're actually looking at the production and what's deployed, once we're starting to look at compliance and baselining best practices, the next part is actually to take it to the next level. So we start to shift left and we start to take advantage of DevOps methodologies and cloud native technologies. So the first thing I typically recommend with organizations is actually, if you're using things like containers or using serverless functions, the first thing to do is really, as well as obviously looking at the active running environment, start scanning the container registries, because that's a very quick win, very simple to do. And it allows me very quickly to see if I've got any compliance or I've got any vulnerabilities in my container images before they get into the live environment. And once again, that's typically something I see most organizations do quite quickly. The next phase is, once we're there, is to actually shift to further left. So to start integrating with the CI and build tools. And once again, integrations with things like Jenkins, Azure DevOps, and other CI tools. What we can start doing is in the first instance, and you can see a screenshot there on the bottom right, we can effectively start to integrate into the build process, and we can start to look for vulnerabilities and compliance issues. And really, as an organization, we've then got choices. Now, in the very early phases, what organizations look to do is they look to do alerting only, so they won't necessarily fail the build, but they will feed it back to both the DevOps teams and the security teams. So we've all got visibility of what's going on. Now, as you start to mature that, what you'll start to do is you will effectively start to turn on failure of the build. So if I've got critical vulnerabilities or critical compliance issues, I've got the capability to fail the build and prevent it getting into a container registry and then onto the running environment. And then, going a step further, you can then start going left even further. So things like SCM, IDE tools, and you can start allowing the developers to do their own due diligence. So before it gets to the build phase, before it gets to the registry, we can actually start to trust the development teams more, allow them to automate that code check-in and let them do their own due diligence. And really just the last point there is, once we're starting to build up this whole process, we can start to fully automate and we can start to add active remediation. And, as we talked about, we start to fail the builds, we start to feedback, and the whole process becomes fully automated. And, just really, the final couple of slides is, security teams, a lot of what we did before was actually very good. So, there's things that need to change and things that we need to understand, but also importantly, the things we did before. So monitoring the active environment. So, if we look at organizations, we see things like Amazon, we look at Netflix that are doing hundreds or thousands of code drops a day. But on the flip side, you've got organizations that are maybe pushing a new image once a month, or they're actively pushing out new builds once or twice a week. So in that case, them applications are going to be basically need to be monitored in the running environment. So once again, from a security perspective, we need to make sure the running environments and the cloud native platforms are actively monitored. So we're looking for anything like exploits. So for example, someone could be trying to crypto mine with a container. They could be trying to abuse a serverless function. So once again, we need the ability to actually be able to first of all monitor. We need to feed that back to the security teams. And then also when we get to that level of trust and automation in the business, we need the ability to take automated responses. And that could be via cloud native processes. So running maybe CLI or API calls, or it could be talking to other third-party tools to actually take them steps required. Yeah, so I'm just very quickly going to touch on this one. So, I've talked about this enough as we've gone through the presentation. Integration is really important. Every time I speak to any customers, something that comes up very quickly is each of the teams have got their own workflows, they've got their own methodologies and their own tool sets. In order for this to be successful, we've got to be able to integrate with their tool sets. If we start changing everyone's working patterns, so if I expect the developers to log into the security tools, I expect them to do things differently, they're probably not going to do it. Likewise, if I expect my security teams to be expert in Python and Perl, they're probably going to maybe struggle depending on their skills knowledge. So what I'd say is, no matter what platforms you're looking at, orchestration is key, and obviously integration. So just really to wrap up on the final slide, as you've probably realised, security is a journey. So we hear all the hype about shifting left, automation, but really these things, depending on the organisation, they're going to take time to do. It's not something we achieve in a day. So really starting with small steps and working towards it is a great place to be. The next part we've talked about culture. So the most important part to make this successful is to break down them silos. Work together as a team in departments. And the great news is, going back to the question at the beginning, it looks like a lot of people are already doing that. And then, as we talked about there, get meetups, get workshops, invite the teams along, get security speaking to DevOps and vice versa. And really the final part is, when you're looking at security and you're looking across all these different cloud native architectures, start to look at a platform. A lot of scripted and open source tools are fantastic, but when you start going multi-cloud, microservice, be it containers or serverless, you may start to struggle with consistency. So that's really it for me today. If anyone's interested, there is actually a really good webinar with our CTO and co-creator of the NIST 800/190 standard, John Morello. So if anyone's interested in finding out more, they can jump on the Webex that's in that link. And I'd just like to obviously thank you all for your time and take any questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Stuart. There was a question from Hamad in the chat saying, what do you think is the most important aspect of security in the cloud?
Oh, that's a very open question, that is. Yeah, so it depends on the type of organization. So some organizations are heavily regulated, so they say compliance is their most important thing. But if we remove the technology aspect, I'd say probably the most important part is the teams working together. Because if DevOps and security aren't speaking, you're not going to go anywhere. And you're going to end up with the same problems you've always had.
Awesome. We're a little bit over. So Raul has a question about what do you think makes a DevSecOps team? What's the difference between this and a separate DevOps security team? It'll take 2 minutes, but yeah, then we'll go to the fake.
Once again, that's a difficult question, because obviously, when we look a lot of, there's a lot of cloud native security people out there, and they class themselves in DevSecOps. So they're fully born in the cloud. They understand security. They're doing automation. They've got automated processes. They've brought into the whole DevOps and automation process. On the other side, we've still got obviously DevOps and security teams that are working as separate units. So security team do what they've always done, and DevOps do what they do, but there's not really a cross-pollination of skills. So at a high level, that's what I'd probably say it is, but there are a lot of people moving more towards that DevSecOps skill set.
Oh, awesome. Question from Danny. How do you deal with a 0-day patch that comes out when the infrastructure is immutable?
Yeah, so once again, you've got to look at the actual, you've got to look at the workloads as well. So depending on the technology you've got deployed. So, there's a lot of technologies included in our own that do things like behavioral baselining and monitoring of the active environment. So things like containers and serverless. And we're actively prevent like rogue processes, file system calls. So there's ways you can do that. Now, when you're looking at an immutable infrastructure, really, I guess it comes down to the business itself. So let's say that you're running on a critical business application. Can you take that out of service to effectively remediate or try and fix the problem? If it's 0-day, you're probably not going to have a patch. So ultimately, you're going to have to leave it running and then add compensating controls around it. So as I said, things like runtime protection, behavioral and baseline of the actual running environment is probably the best route there.
Awesome. Thank you very, very much, Stuart. If anybody else has any questions, please put them in the chat, and then Stuart, you can follow up in chat as well. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you for your time, everybody.
Awesome. Thank you. We're going to take a 10-minute break now, and then we're going to come back to our last speakers, Hasith and Mercion. So feel free to get up, just chill out, get some water. You can open up. I'm going to be here, so feel free to open up your webcams, chat to me for a bit. Who did I see earlier on when we did our photos? I think I see some. I thought I saw Simon was around. Maybe he's not at his computer right now. Oh, Hamad, what do you have? Arabic tea?
Nice.
That is nice. I am, as I mentioned earlier, drinking some not very good coffee here. It's my choice.
Yeah, water. I dare not sneak in. I dare not sneak back into the other part of the house because I've got a 3- and 5-year-old who've just got to sleep.
It's reasonable. Keep it down.
Yeah, if anyone's got any questions while waiting, I'm happy to answer any questions for anyone that's really motivated.
See.
So,
I think it's mainly discussion about tea and coffee now. Sorry, I think I've totally derailed.
That's fair enough. It's I guess it was an in-person one. There'd probably be some beer and booze at the break time.
Yeah, usually I do pizza and beer at the beginning, and then in the break as well, people go out and grab another drink. Do you remember that, being able to talk to people and get a drink?
It's a strange concept, isn't it now? We all come back. We all come back. Yeah.
What are people?
Cheryl, do you remember the
you a little bit better the audience?
Yeah.
Also,
Oof, I'm hearing some background noise. Couldn't make out what you said, sorry.
So Cheryl, is there a particular sort of location you use for these meetups? So is it typically always in London? Is it always the same venue, or do you tend to sort of move around?
It was always in London. We used to use the Skills Matter venue, which was in like Moorgate.
Okay, yep.
Towards the east side. Skills Matter unfortunately shut down. So then we switched to using the Sainsbury's headquarters for a while in Bank.
Oh, yeah, I know that one well.
Yeah. There's only a few venues in London which are really big enough to hold the numbers. Like usually this group gets like before lockdown, we'd probably have 200 to 300 people, depending on weather and topic and whatever else. So there were only so many locations in London that had that much space and would let us use it for free.
Yeah. Did you used to use the main reception area at the Sainsbury's HQ you talked about?
No, like we used the downstairs auditorium.
Okay. Yep.
So people would check in the reception and go down to there.
Oh, okay.
you be able to get a replay?
Skills Matter rebooted, and then a pandemic happened, which is very unlucky.
Yeah.
Not a good time to be in live events.
Yeah, definitely.
Venues. It's kind of a shame because Skills Matter were great. Like location.
Actually, that we've got Sainsbury's as a normal hot menu, don't you think?
I'm getting some really bad interference from the background, so
let me sort it out.
Maybe you want to put it in chat instead. Yeah, because I couldn't quite make out.
I think, yeah, as you said, it's a tough time for events companies, but they'll hopefully come back. Once confidence comes back to people, and maybe a year or so, it's not great, but it's the sad reality of where we are, I guess, isn't it, at the moment? But they come back.
One day.
Yeah.
Let's hope so. Let's hope so.
The flip side, I guess, for myself is I used to get on planes quite a lot to go to meetings around Europe. So, I'd obviously fly out and then sort of spend an hour at a customer and then fly back again. So I'm not really missing the not jumping on planes all the time. So that's, I guess, the flip side of it.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't go somewhere for an hour, but I would usually go somewhere for a couple of days at a time. That was good balance for me.
It's the life of a vendor.
For sure. Got about 4 minutes left on our break time. I missed a slide earlier, which I wanted to mention to people. So let me do that one slide now. Just to say, people, if you want to get involved with this, then this is my blog, oishow.com/CloudNative London is where I handle all of the stuff related to this meetup. So we have, I think the next speaking slots are now June 2021. So we're booking pretty far ahead, but please sign up and we'd love to get you to speak. Especially like first timer, we're very happy to welcome new people. Come and sponsor events. You can join the Slack group and you can catch up on all the videos and blog posts from the last meetups. So yeah, thanks. Let me just stop that. Okay, announcements done. Yeah, one day I would love to go back to, conferences, events. But hey, it's interesting living through history, right?
Definitely so. It'd be yeah, interesting to look back on it in the decades to come or whatever, or and see, and it'd be interesting.
Yeah.
Do you have any idea as such when possibly we might be getting back together? Probably, like, have you got any information about that?
I'm not expecting us to get back together this year, probably. That's my guess.
No, I think I would agree with you with that. I don't think anything's going to happen this year. Probably it's going to be to the mid of next year actually, because this year probably going to have in the winters especially is going to be quite crucial, especially when you're going to have the normal flu virus, the normal flu season coming along, and that's going to be a really bad time at that time. So just batten down the hatches and stay safe. What else can you do?
Well, like last month was the 3rd anniversary of CloudNative London. And I said that when we have our first physical meetup again, then I'll do some kind of celebration for the third anniversary, because we just missed it being virtual. Hopefully we'll be back before the 4th anniversary.
If not, do we get double cake?
We can have as much cake as you like, as long as you can eat it all. It was always funny to me when I was ordering pizza. I was like, I don't know if people will finish this. This looks like a stupid amount of pizza.
Challenge accepted.
Like, yeah.
I just want Coke, okay? I want pizza, yeah, that's good, but I just like Coke, so at least have some nice Quail or Coke and ice, and that's it. I'm happy.
We'll plan something for next time. We are at the 50 mark, so Mercion and Hasith, can I hand over to you for our 3rd talk?
Yeah, sure thing. Let me try sharing. Okay.
Yep, I see your slides.
Hopefully that's good. Cool.
Yeah, over to you.
Make a start then. Okay. Hello all. Nice to. Oops. Right. My name is Hasith, and I lead a couple of the container platform efforts in Webex, and here with my colleague Mercion, and we are going to talk about how we used cloud-native tech in the last 4 months or so to really scale up in a very significant way for our media workloads specifically, but there's definitely, we have grand plans around cloud-native tech. Moving on. Just first of all, I want to give a quick introduction to Cisco Webex. So we do enterprise collaboration pretty much at very high scale. We host over 100 million meetings a month, which equate to billions of virtual meeting minutes. And there's several SaaS businesses that fall under Webex umbrella. So starting from calling side, this is your IP phones that are cloud connected, and which allows various workforces to get in touch using their IP phones. Then meetings business, which makes all the virtual meeting capabilities possible. And then we have Teams side of the business, which makes messaging and other collaboration, content collaboration possible. And then we have contact center arm of the business, which makes contact center related services possible. And certainly the last few months has been very interesting with a lot of customers shifting to virtual meetings and working remotely. and it has been definitely anything but interesting. This is pictures are usually better to give a good idea. So this is some of the room-based collaboration systems we have, and they take various forms, and these things are generally intended towards workplaces, huddle spaces, and trusted by lots of organizations as well. And moving on a little bit more of individual personal devices. So whether it's your laptop, iPad, phone, there's a lot of devices that are also being used, and also personal telepresence endpoints, such as the one on the right-hand top corner, which is called the Desk Pro, and it's one of the most state-of-the-art devices that you can get these days for collaboration and virtual meetings. Moving on, so for cloud native, within Webex SaaS side of the business, we have an internal effort called Webex Cubed, and Webex Cubed leads cloud native efforts within Webex to enable Cisco Webex needs at scale. And when you really step back and look at what various business needs span, they really do span pretty much across the entire cloud native landscape, touching pretty much all the technologies you can think of. So it's quite interesting to leverage and try to do as many things as possible using cloud native tech, and it's definitely interesting and keeps us quite busy. So just to give a quick overview about what does it mean to really engineer for Cisco Webex. When you really think about it, it's not about bringing up 5 Kubernetes clusters. We are really thinking about hundreds of Kubernetes clusters and thousands of instances and worker nodes. Lots of different configurations, network topologies, providers, lots of global locations. Operating systems, it's mostly Linux, but we do have some Windows use cases, and we have been pretty determined to use cloud native tech even for Windows workloads as we modernize those things. And there's also a lot of different types of workloads. So it's not everything is stateless HTTP-based microservice. We have a lot of stateful ones and monoliths, real-time media applications. So it's really, there's a lot of different types of workloads when we look at all the application we have under Cisco Webex. And then when it comes to really security requirements, Cisco definitely has very comprehensive security requirements that we have to adhere when we are putting services into production, and definitely taking the cloud native side of things is quite interesting, and you do have to push the boundaries quite a bit there as well. And then really when you look at implementing cloud native within Cisco, it really comes down to more than the technology. I think it's really, at the end of the day, it's really people and processes. And when it comes to people, Cisco Webex, we have an engineering community that is spanning across the globe, lots of different cultures and very diverse. And when we are looking at adopting cloud native, it's really mostly about a shift in mindset that we need to promote and coach and navigate. And also, when it comes to processes, we have a lot of well-established processes. It's really about how we evolve those methodologies and processes going forward. So this is a use case that we use cloud native technology. So this is a legacy use case, and we recently took this use case and modernized it with cloud native. But I wanted to give a background as to what we had. And some of these technologies are, by all means, it is quite modern, and we adopted containers back in end of 2015. And this is the end state architecture for the media use case that we ended up with. So starting from the top left hand, we were using ChatOps, and it's very much being able to scale infrastructure. Then you had integration with Jenkins for CD side of continuous deployment side of it. And when it comes to actual provisioning and orchestration, it was very much based on quite a bit of Python code and finite state machines implemented in Python that would manage the life cycle of whether it's deployments, whether it's life cycle of a server in terms of patching and whatnot. And if you look on the lower right-hand side on an individual instance, what we had was Dockerized hosts where you'd have a media container running. Obviously, the config management done with Puppet, and we'd manage the application lifecycle by interacting directly with the Docker client. And so let's start with the good things. So we have been using this architecture and to do pretty much hands-off application deploys globally and within global windows. So whenever traffic is off-peak, you do the deploys, but there's no human operator. It's pretty much hands-off. Then IaaS changes were bundled with applications. So if you want to patch OpenSSL or any library like that, they'll be bundled up with a server config, and that would get applied during the normal deploy window. And then you have canaries and validation everywhere. Now, let's start with what's not so good and why we would want to throw away this work. Not throw away, evolve and learn from this work and embrace cloud native more. It's definitely very bespoke. There's a lot of Python code that has been written, whether it's to interact with the APIs or whether it's to do templatizing and the state machines and a whole bunch of other logic. Not designed for wider adoption. So this is a very specific use case, and we designed something for that specific use case as we were adopting modern CI and DevOps methodologies, and definitely scalability issues. So obviously this architecture can be iterated on, but if you're going to SSH in a few thousand nodes, I think you would start seeing issues with having centralized orchestration for that. So moving on, high-level design goals for Webex Cubed. We wanted the control plane to be very portable and turnkey and on Kubernetes itself, and that's partly to eat our own dog food when it comes to control plane applications for what we are offering for application teams. And then the other reason is we want the control plane to be very much tied to an administrative scope and boundary. It's good being able to separate out using namespaces and whatnot your development, integration, and production, but at the same time there will be mistakes made, and it's almost better to have design in such a way that you have protection and also you encourage good hygiene. So for example, when we have completely separate control planes, nothing is shared between those control planes. And that's almost enforced when you think of applying it in a practical way. Then the second point, really to standardize deployments for all applications. It really should not matter what is underneath. There's definitely a big, there's a lot of variables, public, private cloud variations, public cloud providers. You have a lot of environment aspects, and including some of the edge use cases as well. If we do things right for an application deployment, it really should not matter where it's running, other than it being a variable and pulling the right configuration for it. So that's very much where we would want to end up with. And then it's really how do we enable application towards more modern DevOps practices and security practices. It's really it's really pushing those boundaries. So sometimes, if you say you have a password, your password needs to meet these requirements and it needs to be rotated. So then the question is, do we really need a password there? Can we do something else other than having a password here? Can we do short-lived tokens instead, making, for example, password rotation moot? And especially when it comes to user-based access, the best thing to do is have that tied to something like single sign-on with two-factor auth, and that make that also a single point of entry, which is ideal, as opposed to having to log into 10, 20 different systems. Then full stack reproducibility is quite a key feature that we wanted. So what I mean full stack reproducibility, we are thinking a complete Kubernetes cluster plus the application and the whole setup. So we really want it to be not pets. We don't want Kubernetes clusters to be pets. We want them to be managed like cattle. Moving on. So this is the really high-level overview of our architecture, and I'm going to hand it over to my colleague to continue the talk.
Hey guys, so I'm going to talk about the next set real quick. So like Hasith was mentioning, he kind of introduced Webex Cubed at a super high level. And this diagram in front of you kind of sets out at 1,000-foot what Webex Cubed and how we have used Kubernetes and how we are managing our Kubernetes for media workloads in Cisco. So one of the things we've done is we've gone all in on Kubernetes, right? So the top left box there, that's the command and control. What that is it's a Kubernetes cluster that we use for all the orchestration and management of all of our other clusters. So if a new cluster needs to be deployed in AWS in this region, that's where we want all the changes to go through. That command and control is actually deployed in a secure network. It doesn't have public ingresses. That way we can, we build into that all the applications that kind of do Terraform and the Ansible and things like that are all run through there. And on the line on the left, you can see most of our changes to our Kubernetes real estate comes in through GitOps. So what the command and control does is it would go ahead and it would create new clusters, and it would go and create, let's say, an application cluster in AWS. And we've also within Cisco tried to standardize, and especially within this project, tried to standardize on a common set of components within the application clusters. And what that allows us to do is that every time we need to deploy let's say somebody comes along and say, hey, we don't have a cluster in Azure running in this AZ, we can basically, they commit the 4 lines of code into the Git repo. Then the automation within the orchestration cluster, the command and control will say, okay, I need to build that cluster. And it would go and call the Azure APIs or the IaaS APIs to bring up the cluster. But our key point here is that from an application developer's perspective, they really shouldn't care whether they're deploying on a Kubernetes cluster in Amazon, in Azure, or really they shouldn't even care too much about the the IaaS environment underneath it, by kind of making sure that everything within the cluster is fully reproducible, and we can kind of cookie cutter these clusters up across different providers and different topologies. It really makes the application developers' lives a lot easier. The other couple of things I want to touch on here is that you see there's a thing there called regional manager. So this command and control, because that is our controlled orchestration plane, and that's where all the audit happens, all the checks happen, every change to to any cluster from an IaaS level, from an infrastructure level, goes through there. Although everything goes through there, we don't want that as a central point of failure. So what we ended up doing was we ended up building kind of command and control delegates that we kind of call regional managers. And these were, again, just Kubernetes clusters that we would deploy in region, because the act of bringing up a 200 node AWS cluster would take, it can take an hour and a bit to bring that up. We don't want, for that hour and a bit, if you're doing that across multiple regions, the command and control for that time becomes super important. By delegating the actual administration of that to the regional manager, we kind of reduce our blast radius a bit and have a level of HA. So we have this model of having the command and control, which we say that's our class A apps, which run all control plane workloads in a secure perimeter. Regional managers are kind of class B workloads. They are, again, for management and ops workloads, give your DevOps engineers a place to deploy the tooling they want to have visibility of their clusters. So they kind of, there's usually one of them within each region. And then there's the application clusters, which you call Class C clusters, which are actually public-facing clusters taking customer workloads. The one thing I'll quickly touch on, maybe probably in the next slide as well, is the observer cluster. And that is kind of, we do have a mechanism, a model for an observer cluster that monitors all the other clusters so that we can give developers a single view. So that's kind of the high-level architecture of what Webex Cubed is. What happened during COVID? So when we started this project, I think it was about 1.5 years ago, we were like, okay, let's do this Kubernetes thing. We had these nice plans laid out, 12 months, it'll be in production, everything was going fine until kind of COVID happened, and we saw our usage kind of go through the roof. And we really had to kind of put our foot to the pedal and kind of deliver the next generation platform literally over a month, purely because our existing platform couldn't scale. So that was a pretty intense experience for us. We had but by the end of it, and we actually ran out of compute on our OpenStack environments. We bursted into the cloud. But by the end of our scale up, we'd had tens of Kubernetes clusters in multiple regions. We have tens of thousands of nodes distributed globally. And we really got into the habit of building up these clusters. We actually had to scale up in more ways than one. I think one way of scaling up has been, everyone goes, oh, you got to scale up in compute, but you got to scale up your ops teams to manage tens of clusters. You got to scale up your ops teams to now say, I've got to manage AWS instances, being retired, and also Azure instances being retired. You got to, like, scaling up in those kind of operational aspects was also a very interesting challenge for us. But a lot of the platform was, I think this is really a testament to Kubernetes and just the fundamental modular design of it, is that although we had to scale up in all those different ways, the fundamental view of what is the platform for application teams stayed the same, despite us scaling compute and IaaS providers and even network topologies. The other thing I want to talk about is rebuilds and migration. So we have a slightly different operational model for our clusters, I think, compared to other teams, especially because, I guess we like to have a HA model, and we're very risk averse with our Kubernetes clusters. So we don't have kind of Uber clusters. We kind of set ourselves an internal goal saying, what, the biggest a Kubernetes cluster should get to is 250 nodes. After that, spin up a new cluster and start creating lots of clusters. So, and then when it comes to changes, we don't really care about the clusters. If I take the example where we had a couple of weeks ago, we actually found out that we'd be running in production in Europe with the wrong subnets, and we were running out of the pod IPs in our Kubernetes cluster. So we had to think about it. Said, should we try and retrofit this cluster? But in most cases now, we just go, just delete the whole thing, tear everything down, nuke everything, and then pave and build a new cluster up. And by having relatively small clusters, we have the kind of flexibility to move workloads between clusters and then completely tear down the clusters. All the compute in those for that cluster go down to 0 and build everything up from scratch. And what that allows us to do is things like Kubernetes version bumps. We were running on 1.15 in Feb, 1.16 in March, and 1.18 in June. We don't really stress about what would the migration strategy be on a live cluster that's handling traffic. We kind of say, just move the workloads over to another cluster and just delete the whole cluster and bring it all up again. And we've kind of got into this swing of just deleting them and bringing them up. That internally we have a goal that we say no cluster should be more than 30 days old. If it's getting around 30 days, it's probably just delete it and create it again, because that way you can ensure that you can do it in case something happens and you need to build it up again. You have confidence in your tooling. So yep. If we go to the next slide, the other thing I just wanted to touch, I'm appreciative of the time as well. So touch on was operations. So I think as we scaled up and we kind of got into this model of deleting clusters and creating clusters, the kind of downside with having tens of clusters all over the place is you've got tens of clusters you now need to manage, right? There's not just one Prometheus view. There's not just one cluster you want to look at. Now you need to look at metrics. And when you have a problem, you need to correlate that between clusters. Is this a systematic issue in the platform? Or is it specific to clusters running in AWS? So how do I correlate all these kind of different dimensions? So one thing we did was we wanted to have a centralized view for all logs and metrics. So we went with Grafana, deployed on that observer cluster. But at the same time, we don't like the notion of centralized metrics and centralized alerting. We don't want to have one cluster responsible for all metrics. And if that cluster didn't send that alert to alert manager and that cluster didn't send the alert, well, then you don't have alerts. So the model we have is we have Prometheus deployed in every cluster. We have Node Exporter, we have the dashboards, and we even deploy the alerts to every cluster in the same way that we would deploy applications. But at the same time, we use Thanos, deployed on our observer clusters to hook into the Prometheus instances, running on all of the clusters, so that from a ops engineer's perspective, you have the ease of use of going to a single dashboard, single Grafana, you load it up. But Thanos is an awesome project. If you haven't tried it out, I'd suggest you try it. It would query the Prometheus instances in all your clusters. It would collect all that data, it would deduplicate it and actually present a Prometheus interface to Grafana. So you do have that single view. So we've gone kind of, and this has scaled really well for us as we've brought up clusters, deleted clusters, and this is kind of where we throw everything into it. And metrics are kind of a key part of us maintaining the health of our clusters. The other thing I want to touch on is network visibility and monitoring. Kind of touches on what the poll question was. For video conferencing and collaboration, media quality is like super important, we are very sensitive to packet loss, jitter, things like that. So that's kind of different to traditional Kubernetes workloads out there. People are not, running media as much. So we've spent a lot of time where we've now deployed a lot of daemon sets, a lot of tests as part of the applications that are continually monitoring network quality between clusters, between worker nodes, across environments, and all of that monitoring is all just going into that same metrics pipeline. And that's an area where we've invested in writing a lot of tests. And our approach to tests, again, is not centralized. We don't have like a central Jenkins server or central cluster that's validating cluster X is where it can talk to cluster Y and validating things. Instead, what we do is we deploy the testing as a service. It runs again in every cluster. Every cluster is basically just emitting metrics. I say, hey, this is my packet loss to this other node that is covered, and everyone's emitting metrics. Everything goes and then into the aggregated view. And then by using Thanos, we can then correlate those different flows and build alerts across, across environments and across the whole estate. Last thing there was just a note on driving down alerts. The reason why I had this up here is just anecdotally, this is where we spent a lot of time. I think when we were building the platform and doing the testing in the lab and building out the entire integration environments, every now and then we'd run into issues like, hey, kubelet kind of hung there. And that happened like once every month. And we're like, must be a one-off. We don't need to worry about that. But those one-offs, as we deployed to production and we had, tens of clusters and tens of thousands of nodes, they kind of amplified dramatically. So we've spent a lot of time on fixing those and driving down those one-off errors. Cool. So I'm going to finish up by just talking about some key takeaways, right? From our experience, as we kind of went on this super accelerated journey, if I had to look back and say, hey, I should have done that different from day zero, these are kind of our key takeaways. So number one is migrate your configuration to baked images. So what I mean by that is like, we're using things like Ansible and KubeSpray, and like every time you scale up a cluster, there's a lot of configuration that needs to happen. Even things like pulling in the base image. So if you know that every worker node is going to have this daemon set, what we do is let's bake that daemon set container image into the AMI, into your OpenStack image, so that if you want to scale up, you just start your container. You start your image in AWS or OpenStack, and Docker doesn't need to pull from all these places. Even if it's your own container repository, if you do need to scale up fast, even pulling Docker containers, is cost you time. So we basically threw everything into the baked images, and then started to kind of iterate on those baked images as part of the platform. So they would change all the time, and we deploy them out, which means that if we needed to scale, we don't need to worry about how long it would take to do an Ansible configure on 50 nodes. The second point there, just touching on it, is automating workflows. We'd been like a pretty keen team. Like we were pretty keen on automation from the beginning. But what we found is we've got automation for spinning up a cluster. We have automation for deploying applications. We have automations for validating metrics, and we have automation for the other validation. What we found was, if you've got all these clusters, sometimes you need to roll changes across different environments, and automating all the different steps, tying together all your different automation steps and building workflows that map what operators want to do really helped us out. So we have kind of a workflow saying, if you need to rebuild the cluster, there's a rebuild cluster workflow, and we use Argo for that. And Argo has been like really key for us to be able to link the different automation work steps. So I'd suggest you look at that as a project as well, and automate the workflows end to end for your DevOps engineers. So don't automate just spinning the cluster up. Automate spinning the cluster up and deploying the applications and validating it, and keep continuously iterate on your automation, because that just means that the next time it happens, it's just so much easier for your ops engineers. The third point there, testing and validation, again, on the automation side of it. And I'm not referring to testing of the clusters. We have CI jobs that are deleting and rebuilding clusters continually. Test the tooling, test your automation end to end, so that if you get the call on the Sunday saying, hey, we think on Monday traffic's going to be 3 times larger, can you scale up by 3x in this region? You don't need to, you're confident in your tooling. And I think this is, particularly in our industry, this has become more important because it's becoming really hard for us to predict traffic patterns. People are working, people's work patterns are changing. People are working from home. Suddenly it's okay to kind of go into work. So some people are going into work and then it kind of goes back. So asking us to predict traffic when schools opens up again in the US, it's super hard. So you need to be able to scale at any time. And the key thing to scaling is also just having the faith in your tooling to be able to scale. And I'll end it with the last takeaway is Kubernetes is not just for stateless HTTP microservices. I know a lot of, that's where most people think all the cool stuff is, Istio service mesh, and we have our HTTP workloads, and some of our RAC teams are like fully all in on that. But for us, and then because what other people say is, oh, well, I'm doing media, I'm doing SIP, I'm doing stateless. I can't do that on Kubernetes. That's just not going to work. We've been able to get, run a large part of Webex's media on Kubernetes, heavily stateful applications. You can't move a live call between pods. We've been able to deploy things that absolutely have to run on Windows workloads. And so we've got Windows containers. Most things are possible. Kubernetes as an architecture and the platform is very pluggable. It's an awesome community. They love contributions. So if it's not possible, you can make it possible. You can go in, you can extend and enable, which is what we've been doing. And yeah, just a big thank you to the community, saying it's, to be honest, all we've done is literally stand on the shoulders of everything that's been done out there and tweak it and scale it up in a manner that suits us. But it wouldn't have been possible without all the hard work from all the contributors out there.
Mercion, Hasith, thank you so much. That was a really awesome talk. We are just a couple minutes over time. So if people want to ask you questions, we can find you on Twitter or somewhere else.
Twitter, yes.
Or email or whatever.
Yes,
we'll figure out a way.
Slack, Slack, we can, there's a Slack channel, so we can hang around in there for a bit afterwards, I guess. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Sounds great. Yeah, thank you so much. This concludes tonight's meetup. So really appreciate everybody for joining. Thank you so much. We'll see you again in next month, first Wednesday of next month. Take care all. Thank you everybody on YouTube, watching us on YouTube as well. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.